I've hit record. It is now a minute after 11, so people can trickle in as they get here and listen to what we're talking about. Again, I asked everyone what they wanted to hear about. One of the topics was working with buyers and how do you do a buyer consultation? You know, do you share anything with them? How do you do that? And Lynn McCabe has one of the best processes I've ever seen for this. She has been generous enough to share this with us a couple of times in the past. But when I asked her to do this, she didn't hesitate and said, absolutely, I'd love to help. So we really appreciate that, Lynn. And I'm going to turn it over here in a second. I think Lynn's kind of modified it a little bit to kind of reflect what we're dealing with right now, which I think is great. So without further ado, I'm going to hit the speaker view on this, and I'm going to mute everybody and then unmute just Lynn. Good to go, Lynn. You should be unmuted.
So, hey everybody, good morning, and thanks Doug for complimenting me on my process. That's not to say that my process is the way to do it. Everybody has their own comfort level, but it's a process that I've started way back when they introduced this buyer representation, because I really struggled with, the awkwardness of it, to be quite honest. So I really felt I needed to get into a routine where it was just, that's the way it's done. And it has worked for me. I've never had an issue or a problem with somebody not being comfortable with it after my meeting. So I'll just go right into it. I always like to start out with, because I'm curious, how many people have a separate buyer representation meeting? No, nobody? So when I get a call from somebody or a referral from somebody and they say, hey, we got your name from so-and-so, and we, they were really happy. They gave us your name and we want to work with you to buy a house. I said, well, that's great. Like, that's, awesome. And then I do go through some pre-qualifying questions with them. But then I say to them, well, I think that you've answered everything that sounds to me like you've been proactive and that you're ready. And, by those qualifying questions, you're certainly asking them about getting their pre-approval in place, and are they prepared for the steps involved. And then I say, and I think what we need to do next is actually have a meeting to start the process. And I said, it's a way I can get to know you, you can get to know me, and we're going to see if we're going to be a good fit. And I literally booked this meeting as a completely separate appointment from showing houses. So I make it clear to them that we're not going to be looking at houses unless, we really feel like we've covered everything in our meeting, and there's maybe one house I want to use as an example. So the good news about this whole COVID thing is that normally you would meet people in person, and the only thing that's good that maybe has come out of that is we still have to adjust that a little bit, in that we're going to be probably doing a lot more of Zoom, FaceTime, whatever platform you choose to use. And my earrings still fit, so they're not going to see how much weight I've gained. They're just going to see that my earrings still fit. So something you have to keep in mind through the whole COVID thing is your qualifying questions now are probably going to be a little different, in that you're going to find out their urgency, because let's face it, if it's not an urgent need to purchase right now, you're probably going to try and want to say to them, hey, look, we're really recommending that you hold off. And I've had to have this conversation with a couple of people already, and they completely understand. And once you explain the risk, not only to them, but to yourself and to sellers, they are like, oh, wow, I never even thought about your job. I never even, it wasn't. And I think now it's becoming more commonplace that people are understanding it. So what I've always done is I've had them into my office normally to have a separate appointment, or I've met them somewhere to go over a separate appointment where I share certainly working with the realtor, and I go over that. And then I go over the buyer representation form. The reason I do it separately is, well, there's a number of reasons I do it separately. But in my mind, I don't want to treat a buyer any different than I would treat a seller. I need to understand how I'm representing them. So what better way to do that than to have the appointment, go over everything. If they're not comfortable with it, then I think that kind of tells you something too. It tells you about their loyalty. It tells you about, their seriousness maybe. And I think that what everybody needs to remember is it's important going forward where you want to commit your time. So I basically get them in, qualify them, ask them the questions of their wants and needs all at the same time, feel if we're a good fit. I give them a little folder with the buyer representation in it. They're working with a realtor and a couple of listings printed out. And I explain to them that's how I'm going to meet you at properties, is with listings, so that you'll have the information right there when we're looking at the property. And it just helps them understand, if I take the time and I do this now, then obviously when it's time to go out and look at properties, they're, I think, realizing that, you know, this is professional, this is serious, and it's time consuming. And I think they're going to recognize you for that. The other thing I think it does is it really elevates, evaluates, and helps you prioritize early on in the relationship your client's loyalty. And I think you're going to be able to gauge from, if they're willing to come in, take the time out of their work schedule and meet with me, then that kind of tells me these people are legit. They've done their homework and they're going to move forward. And I think it's going to help you get rid of a lot of the time wasters, or the tire kickers, as I guess we call them in the industry. It also gives you the time to let them look over the form itself, because I hate having people just, here, sign here, sign here. After you've gone through it and you've explained it to them, I think it is important to let them go home and look at it in their own leisure time. Because I know as a person signing documents, I get nervous when somebody's watching me, because it makes me feel like, well, they think that I'm, you know, being, you know, over cautious or whatever. But I know I get nervous. So I always say, hey, do you mind, when I have to sign something, do you mind if I go home and just take this paperwork with me and have a quick review of it on my own time? And I think that's only fair to do that the same with them. So again, use your own platform now going forward. Use your own qualifying questions. As far as, I mean, I could get into all that, but that's, you know, going to take up way too much time. I think you have to, you know, do that on your own as far as qualifying in this time frame of COVID. And then explain to them exactly your procedure and your protocols that you're going to have in place. Should they be somebody that has to go out and look at property, I think it's a really good time to have that conversation about what you expect of them. Maybe you want them to show up with a mask on. If they do not have a mask, then maybe you're going to say, hey, look, I can provide you with a mask that will suffice. So those are things you can certainly have conversations about. It's a good time to also discuss the representation and scenarios around the multiple representation, which I think a lot of people still get a little bit nervous about. I have never had an issue with it, but I think, again, it's because I'm not explaining it to them at the time that I'm drawing up the offer. Okay, I know there's a lot of people that do that. I guess that's your comfort level, but I really struggle with, how do I all of a sudden, after I've been showing these people houses for, you know, weeks, months, sometimes years, and now I'm going to say to them, oh, by the way, I need to explain to you how I'm representing you as a buyer, and I need you to sign some documents about that. That looks really, really unprofessional to me. So again, it's just why I just never got in the habit of doing that. I think that the other thing, probably the biggest thing, and I learned this way early in the whole game of this business, was that if it ever came down to, and it's never happened, that I had, well, I shouldn't say that, I had this issue way back in the beginning, and this is how I learned this lesson. If you ever had somebody come back on you and say, after the fact, I didn't know what I was signing with that, they went and bought from somebody else or whatever it was, I didn't know what I was signing. They threw a whole bunch of papers at me while we were doing this offer, and I just signed everything. If you do this at a separate appointment and different bloody, different time date stamps, pretty hard for them to prove to you, to Judge Judy or whoever we're up against, that, you know, you didn't have this separate appointment to go over those documents. So again, just another thing in the back of my mind saying, you know what, I proved that I actually had that conversation with them, went over the documents at a separate time frame than having them drawn up at the offer presentation. I think that the awkward thing still for me is that I get a call when I'm, and obviously it's going to change again now, but you're doing an open house and you get people coming through and they love the house, or, or you get a phone call and it's like, I just saw a house, I just went through an open house, and, I know I haven't been looking or anything, but geez, I love it. I think it's perfect. And I need to, I need you to draw up an offer. And I've had it happen. Again, you're going to have situations where you don't really have much of a choice, but you still need to get that in order so that you're having that conversation first before you draw up the offer. Does that make sense? No, it has. No, yes. I think the other thing that I have a struggle with is, you'll get random calls from people saying that they want you to set them up on a portal. So to me, that's my time. And I don't know that they're committed to me. I don't know that they haven't got 5 other realtors having them set up on a portal. Maybe they don't feel the other realtors are sending them all the stuff that they want to see, or, the other realtors aren't in touch, or whatever it is. Again, that's up to your comfort level, whether you feel you want to set them up on a portal without having some type of commitment from them. And I just take it right back to, I don't do that unless I've had a buyer representation consult with you. And once we've done that and I feel comfortable, you feel comfortable, then I will proceed to set you up. Obviously, you may not be doing this with past clients that you're really tight and close with. From a loyalty perspective, they're legit, or could be family, whatever that is. There's always going to be those. I feel like I have a spot right in front of my face. I feel like there's always going to be those unusual circumstances, but overall, I really think that if once you get in the habit of doing this, it will be very odd for you to not do it that way, and you will just feel more comfortable with it. And I've had more buyers say to me, "Oh my gosh, this was like great. We had no idea how this all worked." So, that's, to me, that was great feedback. And I always ask them, were you okay with coming in and meeting me separately? And they said, this was like perfect. We didn't know how that was all going to work. We thought it might be awkward if we all of a sudden started looking at properties and then we weren't really feeling comfortable, and it's like, oh, that's awkward. But this gives it, and I never say to them, I don't want you to make this decision today. I just say, here's the paperwork. I want you to take it home, and the next time we chat. And then I always do a follow-up email or a phone call to that paperwork going home with them. I give them a couple days to look it over. I phone them up or I email them, whatever. I always ask them what's their preference for communication. And I just say, how did you feel about reading that over? Do you have any questions? Is there anything I need to clarify? Is there anything you're not comfortable with? And honestly, they've literally said, no, we've already got it signed. It's all done. We're ready to hit the road. And do you want us to email? Do you want us to scan it and send it back to you? Do you want us to bring it with us when we come to the showing? So again, I really do think it works. And I think if in the back of your mind, you can just remember, it is no different than working with a listing. You literally cannot work with a listing without paperwork. You can't work with a seller without having your paperwork. So if you keep that in the back of your mind, hopefully that would kind of kickstart the thought process of having a separate meeting beforehand. Any questions?
Thanks, Lynn. I have a couple of questions, if you don't mind.
Sure.
2 things. I was making some notes while you were talking here. Well, if I can just preface it by saying that, the reason I love your process so much is because we've heard over and over again that the buying and selling a home is one of the top 10 most stressful things a human being can do. And what takes away that stress, and why those people appreciate your process so much, I think, is because you're explaining it to them in advance, so that when they actually get into that situation, the stress is much reduced. They know what's going on. In fact, they're going to go, Lynn's a genius. She knew this was going to happen. She told us this 6 weeks ago. So it raises your level of professionalism. It reduces their stress level, and everything goes a lot smoother because you've laid it all out for them in advance. Which I think is fantastic. So I have 2 questions. One is, do you mind sharing some of your qualifying questions? Because I know we've got some people on here that haven't been around that long. And, I try to coach them with some ideas, but I would love to hear some of your qualifying questions.
Well, sure. I mean, the first thing is, you meet them, you get a feel for who's all going to be involved in this transaction, because, all of a sudden you find out, well, it's them, but then all of a sudden their brother's going to be helping them, look at places. And, under these circumstances, we have to have those conversations about whoever's going to be on the paperwork, is who's going through the property. So maybe if your brother has to be involved and he's not going to be on the paperwork, you may have to kind of slow things up a little bit until that's more doable. But one of my qualifying questions is, again, the urgency. Have they been pre-approved? Who all is helping them make these decisions? I really try to get out of them location. Obviously, price is a question, and needs and wants. I can usually tell from their price whether I need to pay attention to their needs and wants because sometimes their needs and wants are not even, they're not even realistic in their price range.
Right.
So when they say, oh, we've been pre-approved to 350, I kind of go, okay, what is your must have? Because at 350, they're good to get the roof over their head, at this market. So those are basically a lot of the some of the pre-qualifying questions. And then depending on the person, I'm also talking to them at that time about schedules. So how can we best suit your schedule for looking at properties? What works best for you? So those kind of things. You certainly can have the conversation about, are you prepared for, if you want to look rurally, do you understand well and septic? I can tell you first-time buyers, I bet you I've talked more than half a dozen out of it once I explain the process of buying rurally. They think they like the idea of being on a vacant or on a lot that's out in the country with, where they don't see many neighbors. And then when you start explaining to them about, well, what do you understand about well and septic? And, you don't scare them, but you certainly educate them and make it real because, you can fix a plumbing problem in the city a lot cheaper than you can fix a septic or a well issue. So I always say to them, unless you're really comfortable with that and prepared for that financially, it's something you really need to think about. So that is definitely something I should have actually mentioned with at the start of this, is that it helps you determine when they say, well, we would look on the outskirts. I've had many say that, and then they've actually changed their minds. And they said, you know what? Thank God you told us that. Our first time home, we're nervous enough. We couldn't take that on top of it.
Right on.
So it's kind of said, I said, like, you know what? Look at your 5-year plan. In 5 years, if you're still looking for that house outside the city, then absolutely be happy to help you. But you really need to think about the cost, and not only the cost with the upkeep of it, the cost of actually having some of the inspections or tests done, because right now a lot of the sellers aren't willing to do it.
Right on. So that's great. Lynn.
And sorry, did you say you had another one?
I want to follow up to that one and then another question. So these questions that you're asking are really the tactical stuff, the pre-approval. Do you understand well and septic, that kind of stuff? Do you get to motivational questions? Do you ask them, what does this mean to you?
I always ask them about their time frame. Like I always say, in a perfect world, when would you like to be moved into this house?
Okay.
I also ask them about their, job location, it's kind of, once you know who the person is and you can kind of draw some things out of them about their family dynamics, it leads you to other questions. And some of them, they're like, why are you asking me this? And I said, because it's important when you pick a house that you've thought about these things. You people that want to live 45 minutes from your job, who would have thought gas prices would go down? But again, did they think of that? Did they plan that in their budget? So you can certainly qualify some of those things at the time too.
Right on. Very good. So my other question, thank you for that. And my other question was, you went into a lot of detail there, but one thing I didn't, or maybe I just didn't hear it. Do you explain the whole process after the offer's in place? So at that initial meeting, you go through all the qualification. Do you also talk about, after we've got a deal in place, here's what's going to happen. Here's what my role is and what I expect from you. Do you talk about that?
Yeah, so in my package, I always do a summary of costs. So I explain to them, so I've got this summary of costs basically in the breakdown of how things are going to happen here. And I don't want to overwhelm you, but this is pretty much the steps. And when they see the steps, they can see the process. It's got what it is, the cost. At the end of the day, here's your closing costs. Are you comfortable? Do you have this saved? if you don't have that saved, what's your time frame do you think you can get that saved? That's been something that certainly they should have gone over when they talked to the lender who pre-approved them. But I find that, sometimes, I don't, and I do ask who their lender is, by the way, and I ask them if I can speak to their lender. And I think maybe I don't have a lot of this written down is because that's just what I've always done. So it's up here, it's in my head, and it's just the way it's done. But it is stuff that you can say to them, I'm doing this not to overwhelm you, but just to kind of give you a little bit of a heads up as to what's coming. I explain to them what I expect from them as far as showings, time frame, as far as being late. If you're not there and you haven't texted me within a 5-minute window of the time frame, I'm not staying. I'm going to go in and apologize to the sellers and leave my card. But it's the sellers now have been put out. I've been put out because maybe I've got other appointments, and I get that stuff happened. But there's time to send me a text and say, "Hey, sorry, traffic is horrendous," or whatever it is. But I find if you don't set those parameters from the get-go, they will take advantage. And I've had it happen, so it doesn't happen anymore. I also kind of talked to them about, choosing lawyers at that time. I talked to them about who's going to help them move. What other incidental costs are you going to be faced when you're moving? So these are all things that, again, are in this kind of little bit of what I call my breakdown for the cost to the buyer that kind of triggers in my mind what's coming at them.
Right on. Fantastic. I love it, Lynn.
And there is something else I want to mention. And this is because those buyer representation forms, when you are explaining them, they can get a little bit legally bajiggly sounding. And I always say, I like those 101 versions that Constantine, I don't know if Constantine's, yes. Constantine does the 101 version. Every time you have a buyer rep meeting, have that out, have that handy. So something just is easier. I use it as to explain every clause, because to me, it doesn't sound like I'm a lawyer. It sounds like I'm just another human being like them. And it puts that into Joe John terms. Instead of I always felt that the going over it line by line, the way it was, always meant I felt like I was talking down to them. So I was like, no, I wouldn't want to hear it that way. So Con, thank you for giving us those 101. I call them the 101 forms.
So what you mean is the ones with the plain English, like they have the red. Yeah, those are fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah.
And just so everybody remember, Constantine does a great job of making sure we get those when the new versions comes out. I think it's December. He sends them out to everybody, so they're updated on a regular basis. Get rid of your old ones and use the new ones on an annual basis. I love that. That's fantastic. How long does this appointment usually take for you?
I usually have them in and out in an hour.
About an hour. Okay. And that's probably because you've been doing the same process for so long, you've got it down to that, right? It's
yeah, I
smoother for you
mean,
now.
I'll be honest with you. Sometimes with seniors, they like it to be longer, but which I'm happy with that. We're having a great old chat. We're bonding. But some people, this is hopefully we go back to a lifestyle that's actually a little calmer and makes everybody wake up and quit rushing around like a bunch of chickens with their head cut off. No offense, Catherine. But again, it's you've got to judge by their body language and their behaviors. I've had some sit there through the whole thing and I'll say, do you have any questions? And they have not said a word. I'm thinking, well, geez, I don't know. Do I want to work with these people? Because I tell them at the meeting, I don't expect you to talk about the house when we're in the house. I'd actually prefer you didn't. But when we get outside, I'm looking for some feedback. So when we get outside, in between, we're on our way to the next house, and I meet out front. Don't rush to the door, because I'm going to be asking you what you thought, or what were your top 3 things at the last house? What were your top 3 negatives? Because usually if they come up with 3 negatives, you can cross that one off the list.
Very good. Very good. Those were my questions. I wanted to open up to everybody else. Did anyone else have questions for Lynn today? Great presentation.
I have a question. I'm a little unclear on the summary of costs. If we, doesn't have to be today, if we can kind of go over that at some point.
Yeah, there is a copy of a buyer closing cost checklist in your training manual that you got, Stacy.
Does it have values though? Like that's the thing
Oh,
that
you want the
I'm a
hard
little,
numbers. Okay.
yeah, I'm unclear on the numbers.
Okay.
Sorry, Stacy. It might have been my internet, but I lost you for about 20 seconds.
I'm just unclear on the summary of costs. Like I understand the line items. I just don't know the values to how, to explain to people well enough yet.
Okay, so for example, like let's say it was a $350,000 purchase, right? Then you would just take that, you'd start with, okay, we've already got the financing in the works. While we're doing that, we're gonna line up the home inspector. So then I do a home inspection within 10 days of offer, and I've got, $350. If it's a well and septic, I just have a little spreadsheet that I quickly, it's like a little, what do you call it, Excel sheet. You quickly, well and septic expense for inspection could be this. And I break it down in the order that it's going to happen, all the way down till you get to the legal fees. And I usually use like a legal, like I had one from a lawyer, a client actually sent me their legal fees, and I literally just kind of broke it down. And it's going to be a little different for everybody, but you can basically break it down based on purchase price. If you use and then don't, obviously with the first time buyers, you're going to be showing them how the land transfer taxes is included up until a certain price. If it's not a first time buyer, you do an adjustment for that based on the purchase price. Does that make sense? All the way down, the very last thing I get to is near the closing date. I always remind them that their lawyer is going to phone them with their summary total to have ready to show up at the lawyers. And obviously I can't give them that exact, but I can give them something close. And then I always have incidentals at the bottom. Do you need to hook up, do you need to hook up this, that, and the other? Do you need to have your address change cards done, whatever? And you just go on to Canada Postal Canada Post.
I hope we didn't lose Lynn there. She's battling rural internet like I am, so hopefully she's back with us.
These are all little extra costs on closing.
Okay. Lynn, well, we lost you there for a few seconds, I think.
Okay.
You were talking about Canada Post?
Well, just saying that there's some incidental costs like that come up at closing. Do you have to have your internet re-hooked up? Do you need to have cable? Whatever it is that are your personal choices. Just little reminders at the bottom of my summary sheet to say, hey, you've got to keep these in mind. You've got house insurance now, like, things that they probably, if they're a first time home buyer, they may not have had that before. So just little reminders.
Right on.
Moving costs. Is that something your family's going to help you with a couple pieces in a box of beer? Like maybe, but if not, are you hiring a U-Haul truck?
Right on. Very good. Any other questions? Not seeing any, and there's nothing in the chat right now either.
I have a quick question.
Go ahead, Kai.
Lynn, when you said you have that English version, the educational version of the buyer rep, do you actually send that away with them with the other one, or you just have it there for you to explain?
Yeah, I just have it in my file to go over it with them. I just tell them that. I say, I'm just going to go over this with you in, basic terms, and then I'm going to send you the actual form. And so they know why I'm, that's just going to be the shorter version, but that's why, and then I send them with the real, now I have everything filled in on that real copy, except for, like our time frames, because obviously we don't know those quite yet. But I literally have like Century 21, my name, have everything else in there. And then I send them with that copy.
Okay, thanks.
And then I also do ask them if they prefer that I send it to them through DocuSign, because that's a good opportunity to have you see if they're comfortable with DocuSign instead of at offer time when they're like, again, this is a good way to kind of say, hey, I want you to see how easy DocuSign is. Let's start with this.
Excellent. I love that. Very good. Anybody else? Looks like Dean's got a question. Oh, hang on, Dean.
Dean, do you think Dean's muted?
Yeah. Try again, Dean.
sorry.
You're there.
You're here now. I unmuted you.
Oh, okay. I just want to say, can you see this?
Pull it up higher.
Higher, move it higher.
Higher, higher, higher. AREA
Yeah.
standard
Says
forms.
standard forms?
Yeah.
AREA standard forms?
Yeah.
Under the AREA, you can find educational copies for many. And a lot of times, maybe because I've owned them or somebody, family member has recommended them, when I'm doing what Lynn does, I also give them the offer educational form to read at their leisure. I don't care if I've sold them 5 houses because it changes.
Mhm.
And it
Yeah.
might have
Great
been
idea.
a bit since they bought the last one. So a lot of times people will sign right then.
Mm-hmm.
It just depends on who, and otherwise, yes, I follow exactly how Lynn does it. And if you ever get up in front of a judge, or have to, God forbid, I have never had to, they are going to like that you took the time and you had that lapse that she's instructing you how she does it. Because
Absolutely.
you didn't force them to sign. They're not going to say, oh, I didn't know what I was signing.
Exactly. Okay, any other questions? Seeing none. Thanks so much, Lynn. Really appreciate you doing this with us.
Welcome. Anytime.
Thanks, Lynn.
We'll talk to you later, guys.
Welcome.
Have a great
Welcome,
day.
everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks, Lynn.
You're welcome. Bye.